I'm going to be very agreeable today. No disagreements.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
and that, I was hoping you wouldn't be, because I'm never agreeable. But the problem is that, like, I think the issue of peer review is really, really simple. Be helpful where you can. Don't say things you don't know what you're talking about, and recognize that this stuff, your actions actually have an implication on people's careers, the science, the field, patient care, how doctors are educated, so on and so on and so on. This is not a game, right? And sometimes we have a tendency to treat it like one, right? Because it's just numbers on a page to us, but it's not a game.
No, it's not. But if it's something that you're serious about, there is like almost like a career trajectory where you can explore, right? Like every editor starts off on the mean streets of peer review and doing a really good job for a bunch of journals. And then at some point, you might see a call for something. Maybe someone will tap you on the shoulder because they've read your reviews and they really want to headhunt you. That's how you get into kind of the editor game, right? Usually as an assistant or a decision editor or associate editor, and you work your way up. And so those are kind of things. There's a great question here from Dr. Yusuf Yilmaz, who's asking, is it acceptable to look up authors' profiles on the internet, social media, Google Scholar when you review their paper? That's an interesting thing. I'll be honest with you, that's probably not something I routinely do, but the Google Scholar definitely makes sense to me to understand kind of like where they're at. But a lot of the time when I'm reviewing, I actually don't have access to their names. But what I will do is often plug in, I do look at the references, and people, and this is where the blinding sometimes doesn't work here, unfortunately, because often people do cite themselves. So it's kind of obvious based on their arguments and the style and the world that work they're working on. The journal that Seth edits for Annals of Emergency Medicine, they have a no blinding policy because they did QA work within them, and to notice that basically everyone could always guess who was writing the paper anyway. And maybe that's a testament to how small the emergency medicine academic field is. But people were usually able to make a best guess. So there are limitations to what you can do. So I guess if you had openly available data such as their name to be able to triangulate, then I don't see that it'd be a huge problem. But I'm not sure what it would necessarily add.
Yeah, I'm mindful of the time, but I'm just going to jump in that this sort of thing can induce bias, because who would be at a disadvantage would be an early career researcher who could be very sound in their skill set and their study team, who could be accomplished and peer-reviewed funding. You wouldn't find that necessarily on social media or Google Scholar. Mm-hmm. But you would probably see a shorter list of publications against their ability. Mm-hmm. So I would say that I agree with Teresa. It's not always possible to blind. We all know who's conducting what RCT. You could look things up on clinicaltrials.gov. But in general, we are all taken by big names, and we tend to miss methodological flaws in publications that even seasoned names are prone to. They might not pay attention to some level of detail that a more junior investigator might pay attention to. I'm just providing scenarios here where I think the most important aspect of the review should be the quality of the work and the inferences made and the clarity around which data and completeness around which the results are presented, less so the author names. The reason I suggested double blinding is because sometimes a junior reviewer might be a little trepidatious in terms of raising an issue that might be an important one, because everyone knows that their paper is also going to be prone to peer review, and one of the folks whose submissions we review are going to be the ones called upon to review our work. So I think in terms of really providing a sort of risk-free review that's sound, there might be arguments for double blinding, but I'm going to leave it at that. We're out of time.
Yeah.
There's also an issue about open repositories, open peer review, where preprint servers could be a great opportunity for journals to approve and encourage and have the open reviewers from our group of colleagues, statisticians, provide comments. There have been many, many papers in which important reviews have been provided by social media users, which journals could capitalize on. I think we do need to tweak the process that peer review occurs in. That's a subject for another day, but I'm going to throw these out and then stop
for
talking.
sure. Yeah. Well, you're right. Like the reviewer bias, like, and the ramifications for the reviewers can be quite heavy. So I think most journals do have that single blind, at least, to protect the reviewers. There are certain communities, like the meta community, that are trying to encourage openness, but you can opt in to having your name, and that's something that you're allowed to do and encouraged to do by some of the editorial boards, but it's up to you. And usually the more senior people that opt in, because they're safer psychologically. So I agree with you. But,
yeah, I mean, I would agree. In fact, like, the question is why do you want to know who these people are? I where it was important to know who these people were, but that was not so much in terms of their status and so on. It was more in terms of trying to understand, because they would make mention of some work that they had done, and you kind of want to understand a little bit of the context of their laboratory. But I mean, as an editor-in-chief, when I'm doing my initial screen, I skip right by the names and I go straight to the abstract. Because who wrote it is completely irrelevant. And I mean, maybe I say that because I work in several fields, and I like to think that my ideas are as good as anyone else's ideas. I say that as an educator, where I've had students correct me, right? So just because somebody has status and so on doesn't mean that that their work is necessarily good. And we know of Nobel Prize winners whose first paper out of the gate won them the Nobel Prize, right? So I agree. It's who wrote it is completely and utterly irrelevant. So yeah, I don't know if double blind really always solves the problem, but again, there's no good reason for it to not exist, because it doesn't add anything to the paper. Like, the name of the author adds nothing to the paper. So
yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what both of you said. I think it's who the author or authors are isn't what's important. And I think looking them up could lead to all sorts of biases, both professional and weird interpersonal stuff, unfortunately. I think the one potential time would be if it's a topic where contextualizing the research might be helpful, where it's situated. If they have a big body of research and there's one piece that by itself might seem innocuous, but fits in strangely, I feel like any analogy I make at this point would be really weird and esoteric.
Well, I was going to say there's a classic example for our discipline. There was a journal article in the Korean Journal of Emergency Medicine that was about the non-inferiority of female residents and their ability to intubate. And if you were just reviewing for that journal and you didn't understand the cultural context, as many people didn't understand even when it was published, you might not understand that was a battle they were fighting at the time. And so that even though the terminology, yes, it was the correct terminology, needed to be reframed better and contextualized more, it would be important to know, I think, if it was all women that wrote the paper versus all men who wrote the paper, it would be interesting to understand kind of like the context of some of that work. So I think there are times, and as a qualitative researcher, we just ask people right in the methods to put who they are, and they have to declare all of their reflexivity and bias and stuff like that. So they're baked into the process. And so that definitely is a different model, right, for really how fully you declare yourself, right? Just like Harriet has suggested that you need to declare, if your conflicts of interest, intellectual, financial, and friendship based, you should probably think about that as an author. Sometimes those are the standards in the field for the kind of research that you're doing too. So.
Can I make one comment about disagreement before we wrap up?
Yeah.
So quite often I work in areas where there are professional disagreements on things like underlying theory and so on. A paper could be methodologically sound, but work under a theory that may not be accepted by you, but may be accepted by others in the field. And that paper is not categorically a bad paper because you don't buy into the way they look at the issue. And it's especially problematic when you deal with a general journal like myself, because the sociology world looks at the problem very different than, say, maybe medical education people might, and then, maybe some political scientists might on issues. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. But if you do a really good review and you outline, your issues with that theory, as an editor, I will often invite you to write a rebuttal, a commentary, or something. And so I think it's really important that if you do have something to say about this and you feel strongly about it, there's nothing wrong with, leveraging your position as a reviewer on the paper, having a first look at this and being able to enter into the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
is
that's great.
Far more valuable than, a review that just kind of disappears. So it's also something to be aware of. I mean, not every journal lets you do it. I know some of the bigger journals that the other panel members work with have a tendency to invite people for commentaries on really big papers. But, I guess if you put a really good effort in and you really outline your position, you might find that position gets in the journal anyway.
Yeah, it's funny. Actually, I had that happen when it's like my third or fourth review for one of the journals. Is that I was sitting with my colleague who's a friend and colleague that actually a friend and colleague both of ours, Mahan, and I was going over the review with him just to make sure he was happy with my review. And he was like, 2 weeks later, he invited me to write the commentary based on our conversation. And so I think that that's definitely something that you can contribute to the field. It might pan out to a career opportunity for yourself if you do really great reviews. So.
It got me a postdoctoral fellowship at Columbia.
Wow. Oh,
right?
Wow.
I wrote a review. I had a discussion with it was a CMAJ, with the editor. I outlined my position. They said, could you write a commentary? Someone read that commentary in New York and said, oh, you're working on this area. I'm looking for a postdoctoral fellow. Do you want to come down to New York?
Very cool.
It doesn't get better than that. Right?
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to do final thoughts. So I'm going to kick it to Dr. Treuger to give his final thought, and then I'll go to Dr. Van Spall, and then we'll end with Dr. Mercuri.
Great, thanks. Again, I really just want to reiterate, if you're doing peer review, keep it focused. What we want is focus, sharp, broad stroke things on I think that the two broad categories is this relevant and interesting topic in the field that I have expertise in? And is it a well-done study that's methodologically correct and reported properly? And you might fit in various places across a mix of those two for different reviews you're doing, depending on a lot of things. And really just the editor wants to know your thoughts. You're being asked because you have some level of expertise, and we want to know, do you think this is important? Do you think this is well done? Do you think there's something we should do? So please tell me that, and do it in a nice, focused way. And I really don't want to hear about, you can say things like the grammar needs to be improved, but don't do all the grammar stuff. Don't do the little nitty gritty. We want broad stroke editing stuff, not the nitty gritty editing stuff. Yeah. We want to hear what you think about the paper.
I would add to that just to clarify, a lot of journals will have copy editing services. So it might be good just to look quickly if that's part of the workflow, or ask the editor that asked you, like, hey, do you guys have copy editing? Because I'm going to not worry about the periods and commas and things like that then, because there's often someone that actually does that as their full-time job. So you can let them have that, right? So you can offload your cognition to that other person. All right, Dr. Van Spall, do you want to take it away?
I would just say peer review is a great opportunity to impact clinical care. It's also a great opportunity to grow in your research network and in your own self-learning. I think that I've learned a few things about research methodology through peer reviews that I've given. And so it's a two-way street. It's a service, and capitalize on it, have fun with it. I would say review fewer studies, but do it with detail and do a thorough job versus feeling stretched thin and not providing an impactful review.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Dr. Mercuri, final thoughts.
Yeah, I think if you're going to enter into reviewing papers, which I highly encourage, you should be very organized with your thoughts. You should be you should write them in such a way that shows some level of professionalism, because if you want those ideas to be addressed in the paper, what comes back is disorganized. So it's really try to be, I guess, as I said, professional and helpful how you can.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, everyone. And that's another episode of MacPFD Scholarly Secrets. So thank you for coming.